There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. They were the plain clothes of a Tuesday night, or the quiet hum of a refrigerator in a silent apartment. They do not announce themselves with thunder or fanfare. They simply are. And it's only later, when you trace the map of your life backward, that you see them for what they were. The subtle shifting of tectonic plates, the quiet, irreversible turn of a tide. For me, that moment was the sound of a key in a lock that wasn't mine, followed by a question that carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken conversations. It was the moment the architecture of my entire world began to change, not with a demolition, but with the quiet, hesitant opening of a door I had long since believed was sealed shut. The question itself was simple, murmured into the shadowed space of my living room. Barely a disruption to the city sounds filtering through the window. "Can I stay here tonight?" Liam asked it without looking at me, his focus entirely on unlacing his running shoes, a task he performed with the slow, deliberate care of someone defusing a bomb. His voice was rough, frayed at the edges from exhaustion and something else, something I hadn't yet learned to name. In that moment, he was just my friend, my best friend, seeking refuge. But the air between us was thick with the unsaid, a dense fog of shared history and my own secret, carefully tended longing. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that my answer would be a foundation stone for whatever came next. Saying yes was not just offering a couch for the night. It was acknowledging a crack in the dam we had so carefully constructed between us, and I had no idea if the water that seeped through would be a gentle stream or a devastating flood. To understand the weight of that simple question, you would have to understand the geography of our friendship. You would have to know that Liam and I existed in a state of carefully calibrated proximity, a dance of orbits that never quite intersected in the way I secretly yearned for. We met in the autumn of our freshman year of college, two boys adrift in the overwhelming sea of new beginnings. He was the sun, and I was a satellite caught in his gravity. Liam was a track star, all-coiled energy and easy laughter, a magnet for people. He moved through the world with a casual confidence that seemed to be his birthright, his blonde hair catching the light, his smile a disarming flash of white that could charm professors and pacify rivals. He was kinetic energy personified, a blur of motion on the track, a vibrant splash of color in a world I had always experienced in shades of gray. I, on the other hand, was a creature of stillness and shadow. An art student, a photographer, my natural habitat was behind a lens, observing the world from a safe distance, cataloging moments without ever truly participating in them. I found my voice not in conversation, but in the composition of a photograph, in the way light and shadow could tell a story more profound than any words I could string together. Our friendship should have been an anomaly, a statistical improbability. He was the roar of the crowd. I was the quiet click of a shutter. Yet, somehow, we found a shared language in the spaces between our words. It started with him noticing me on the bleachers during practice, a solitary figure with an old film camera, day after day. Most people ignored me, another art student fulfilling a class requirement. But Liam saw me. One afternoon, sweat plastering his hair to his forehead, he jogged over, his breath coming in white puffs in the crisp air. He didn't ask what I was doing in a way that felt accusatory. He asked with genuine curiosity, his blue eyes squinting against the low sun. He wanted to know what I saw through my lens. I tried to explain it, the way I was trying to capture not just the action, but the exhaustion, the fleeting moment of grace in a runner's stride, the lonely determination of an athlete pushing past their limits. I expected him to lose interest, to offer a polite nod and run back to his world of stopwatches and starting blocks. Instead, he listened, truly listened, and then he said something that tethered me to him irrevocably. He said, "I never thought about it like that. It always just feels like pain. You make it look beautiful." From then on, a strange and wonderful symbiosis developed. I became the unofficial documentarian of the track team, and he became my muse. I learned the rhythm of his breathing, the precise clench of his jaw before a race, the slump of his shoulders in defeat, and the brilliant, unadulterated joy of his victory. My camera loved him. It loved the way the stadium lights carved definition into the muscles of his back, the way a single bead of sweat could trace a path down his temple, the way his entire being seemed to vibrate with life. Through my lens, I could study him without fear. I could trace the lines of his face and commit them to memory. I could capture the fleeting expressions that hinted at the boy behind the athlete's facade. And in return, he gave me access. He brought me into his world, introducing me to his teammates not as a weirdo with a camera, but as Ethan, his friend. He made space for my quiet nature in his loud world, a small, protected pocket where I could simply be. Our friendship deepened over the next 4 years, settling into a comfortable, domestic rhythm. We became a unit. It was Ethan and Liam. We studied together in the library, his long legs stretched out under the table, constantly jiggling with restless energy while I sat in focused silence. We ate most of our meals together, debating everything from philosophy to the merits of different pizza toppings. And we developed a ritual that became the spine of our relationship. He would walk me home. His dorm was in the opposite direction of my off-campus apartment, but without fail, after a late night at the library or a post-practice dinner, he would insist on the detour. Those walks were my sanctuary. The campus would be quiet, the air cool, the world shrunk down to just the two of us moving under the orange glow of the streetlights. We talked about everything and nothing. He would vent about his demanding coach, his anxieties about qualifying for nationals, the fleeting dramas of his dating life. I, in turn, would talk about my art, my frustrations with a particular project, the quiet anxieties that were my constant companions. It was on these walks that I fell, slowly and completely, in love with him. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic fall. It was a gradual erosion, like a coastline giving way to the sea over centuries. It was in the way he'd nudge my shoulder with his when he was making a point, a casual touch that would send a jolt through my entire system. It was in the low, rumbling sound of his laugh when I made a rare, dry joke. It was in the fierce, protective look he'd get in his eyes if anyone gave me a hard time for being quiet. He saw me, and he accepted me, in a way no one else ever had. He never pushed me to be more outgoing, never made me feel like my introversion was a flaw to be corrected. He simply made room for my silence, treating it not as an absence, but as a language he was willing to learn. And I loved him for it, with a desperate, hopeless ache that I packed away into a small, locked box in my chest. I became an expert in the art of concealment. My love was a secret garden, a place I tended to in private, never allowing a single vine to creep out into the open where he might see it. The risk was too great. Our friendship was the most stable, most important structure in my life. I would rather live with the quiet ache of unrequited love than risk the demolition of everything we had built. He was the boy who walked me home every day, and that had to be enough. After graduation, our lives, which had been so neatly intertwined, were suddenly pulled in different directions. He was scouted for a professional track club in the city, his dream within reach. I found a small apartment and a job assisting a commercial photographer, a practical step that paid the bills while I worked on my own portfolio. We lived 45 minutes apart by train, a distance that felt both manageable and immense. The easy, everyday intimacy of college was gone, replaced by scheduled phone calls and weekend plans that sometimes fell through. I felt his absence like a phantom limb, a constant, dull ache where his presence used to be. Yet, we worked at it. We maintained the connection, refusing to let the logistics of adult life sever the cord between us. He would call me after a grueling practice, his voice a low murmur of exhaustion, and I would listen, offering what little comfort I could through the phone lines. I would send him photos I'd taken, a visual diary of my life, and he would always text back, his praise a small, warm spot in my often lonely days. The carefully constructed dam began to show its first signs of stress about a year after we graduated. It began not with a bang, but with a hairline fracture. Liam's long-term girlfriend, a woman he'd been with since his senior year, broke up with him. It was messy and sudden, and it left him completely adrift. He called me late one night, his voice thick with a pain he was trying so hard to suppress. He didn't cry, but I could hear the shattering of his composure in the strained silence between his words. He felt blindsided, lost. For the first time since I'd known him, the easy confidence was gone, replaced by a raw, bewildering vulnerability. He had built so much of his future around her, and now that foundation was gone. He felt, he told me, like he was standing in the middle of a field with no map and no compass, the sky a vast, empty expanse above him. That was the shift. That was when he started to need me in a new way. Before, I had been his confidant, his quiet counterpoint. Now, I became his anchor. He started showing up at my apartment unannounced, his gym bag slung over his shoulder, a hollow look in his eyes. He'd say he was in the neighborhood, or that he didn't want to go back to his empty apartment, an apartment that was still filled with the ghosts of a shared life. I never questioned it. I would just open the door wider and let him in. He would collapse onto my worn-out sofa, the one I'd dragged from a thrift store, and a heavy silence would fill the room. He didn't always want to talk about it. Sometimes he just wanted to be. He just wanted to exist in a space that didn't echo with his loss. And so we would sit. I would put on a record, something soft and instrumental, and make us tea. He would stare at the ceiling, and I would pretend to read a book, my eyes scanning the same page over and over, my entire being hyper-aware of him, of the fragile truce he was trying to broker with his own grief. This was the beginning of the ritual. It started with those quiet evenings on the couch. He'd be on one end, I'd be on the other, a respectable continent of cushions between us. We'd watch old movies, the flickering light of the screen illuminating the exhaustion on his face. He would fall asleep halfway through, his head eventually lolling to the side, his breathing deepening into a steady, rhythmic cadence. The first time it happened, I was paralyzed. I sat there for over an hour, my own body rigid, terrified of waking him. The urge to reach out, to smooth the worried furrow between his brows, was a physical force I had to fight against. He looked so young, so unguarded in sleep, the athlete's armor completely stripped away. Eventually, I would gently nudge him awake, and he would blink at me, disoriented, before murmuring an apology and heading for the door, disappearing back into the night. But then came the first Tuesday. He'd had a terrible day at practice. His coach had been riding him hard, his performance was off, and the weight of his breakup seemed to be pressing down on him with renewed force. He showed up at my door looking utterly depleted, a ghost of the vibrant man I knew. We went through our usual routine: tea, music, comfortable silence. But when the time came for him to leave, he hesitated at the door. He stood there for a long moment, his hand on the knob, his back to me. And then he turned, his face awash in the dim light from the hallway, and asked the question, "Can I stay here tonight?" The words hung in the air, fragile and heavy. "My head's just loud," he added, as if he needed to provide a justification, a logical reason for this breach of our unspoken rules. "I don't think I can handle the quiet at my place." My apartment was a small one-bedroom. There was the couch, and there was my bed. That was the unspoken calculus of the moment. I knew what he was asking, and what he wasn't. He was asking for sanctuary, not for intimacy. He was asking for the comforting presence of another human being to ward off the demons that gathered in the silence. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. A part of me, the cautious, self-protective part that had guarded my secret for years, screamed at me to say no, to offer him a blanket for the couch, to maintain the boundary. But the other part of me, the part that loved him so fiercely it was an ache in my chest, couldn't bear the thought of sending him back out into the night to face his ghosts alone. So I said yes. I heard my own voice, sounding impossibly calm, say, "Of course. You can take the bed. I'll take the couch." He looked at me, and the relief that washed over his face was so profound it was almost painful to witness. It was as if I had thrown him a lifeline. He just nodded, a small, grateful gesture, and a silent contract was signed between us. That night was a study in exquisite torture. I lay on the couch, every nerve ending alive and tingling, listening to the sounds of him moving around in my bedroom. I heard the soft creak of the floorboards, the rustle of clothes, the sound of the faucet in the bathroom. And then, silence. The silence was worse. My imagination filled it with images of him in my bed, under my blankets, his head on my pillow. I felt like an intruder in my own home. I barely slept, my mind racing, analyzing every nuance of the evening, trying to decipher a code that probably didn't exist. Was this just about his breakup? Or was it something more? I warned myself not to read into it, not to let my hope, that treacherous, resilient weed, take root. This was friendship. This was what friends did. I was his safe harbor, and I had to be content with that role. To want more was to invite disaster. The next morning, he was gone before I woke up. A hastily scrawled note was left on the kitchen counter. "Thanks, E. You're a lifesaver. See you soon." The casualness of it was both a relief and a disappointment. It meant I hadn't made things weird. It also meant that, to him, it was nothing more than what it appeared to be, a friend helping a friend. But that first night set a precedent. The ritual evolved. A few weeks later, he stayed again. This time, I insisted he take the bed, and he argued, but his protests were weak. The third time, he didn't even protest. It became a regular thing, maybe once or twice a week. He'd text me late in the evening, "Brutal day. Mind if I crash?" And I would always say yes. My apartment became his sanctuary, my bed his refuge. And I, the faithful guardian of his peace, would retreat to the lumpy couch, lying awake for hours, close enough to hear him breathe, yet a universe away. I became intimately familiar with the sounds of him sleeping. I learned the difference between the deep, even breaths of true rest and the restless, shallow breathing that meant his mind was still troubled. Sometimes, I would hear him murmur in his sleep, a jumble of words I could never quite decipher. On those nights, the urge to go to him, to sit on the edge of the bed and just be near him until the restlessness passed, was almost overwhelming. But I never did. I stayed on my side of the door, a silent sentinel. The closed bedroom door became a powerful symbol, a physical manifestation of the boundary I was so desperate and so terrified to cross. It was a barrier protecting him from my feelings and protecting me from the potential devastation of his rejection. The space was charged with a strange, unspoken energy. It was a platonic arrangement that felt profoundly, achingly intimate. I was sharing my most private space with him, but we never spoke of it. In the morning, he would be up early for practice, and we would fall back into our easy, familiar friendship, making coffee, talking about our plans for the day, the charged intimacy of the night before dissolving in the morning light like a dream. We existed in a state of carefully curated plausible deniability. Then, another shift. It was a cold, rainy night in November. He'd been staying over more frequently, the excuses becoming thinner. It was no longer just about bad days. It was just what we did now. That night, I had fallen asleep on the couch early, exhausted from a long shoot. I woke up hours later, disoriented, to the feeling of a blanket being gently draped over me. I opened my eyes a crack and saw Liam standing there, his silhouette framed by the faint glow of the streetlights through the window. He thought I was asleep. He stood there for a long moment, just looking at me. I held my breath, my heart pounding. And then, he did something that completely unraveled me. He reached out and very, very gently brushed a strand of hair off my forehead. His touch was feather-light, almost hesitant, but it burned a trail across my skin. It was an impossibly tender gesture, a gesture that did not belong in the neat, platonic box I had built for our relationship. He pulled his hand back quickly, as if he'd been burned, and then he retreated into the bedroom, closing the door softly behind him. I lay there, wide awake, my mind reeling. The air was electric. That single, fleeting touch had changed everything. It was an anomaly, a piece of data that didn't fit the established pattern. For years, I had been the observer, the one who saw everything. I had noticed the way his eyes would sometimes linger on me a second too long, the way he would find excuses for casual physical contact, a hand on my back, a playful shove. I had cataloged these moments and dismissed them, filing them away as wishful thinking, as my own desperate projections. But this was different. This was done when he thought I couldn't see him. It was an unguarded moment, a glimpse behind the curtain. and it planted a dangerous seed of hope in the barren soil of my heart. What if I wasn't the only one feeling this way? What if his need to be near me wasn't just about finding refuge from his own loneliness, but about seeking out my presence specifically? The ritual began to fray at the edges after that. The unspoken tension between us grew, becoming a third presence in the room. The silence, which had once been comfortable, was now heavy with things we weren't saying. I would catch him looking at me with a strange, unreadable expression, a mixture of confusion and something else, something softer. One evening, we were on the couch, watching a movie. He wasn't on his end, and I on mine. Over the weeks, the continent of cushions between us had slowly eroded, and now our shoulders were just barely touching. I was acutely aware of the warmth of his body, of the fabric of his t-shirt against mine. My entire focus was on that single point of contact. Halfway through the movie, he shifted, and his hand came to rest on the cushion between us, his pinky finger brushing against mine. It was such a small thing, but it felt monumental. Neither of us moved. We sat there for the rest of the movie, our fingers just touching, the silent acknowledgement of the contact hanging in the air like a held breath. It was terrifying, and it was wonderful. The dam finally broke on a quiet Sunday night. He hadn't planned on staying over. He'd come by to drop off a book I'd lent him. But a storm had rolled in, a sudden, violent downpour that lashed against the windows. We stood at the window, watching the rain slick the streets, turning the city lights into a blurry watercolor painting. "Looks like you're stuck here," I said, my voice betraying a nervousness I couldn't hide. He didn't answer right away. He just kept staring out at the rain. Then he turned to me, and his eyes were dark, serious. The air crackled. The usual script we followed on these nights felt inadequate, flimsy. We weren't playing our usual roles. Something was different. "Ethan," he said, his voice low. He took a small step closer, and my breath caught in my throat. He was inside my personal space now, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes, close enough that I could smell the rain on his jacket. "I'm tired of the couch," I heard myself say, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. It was a reckless, impulsive thing to say, a complete deviation from the careful game we had been playing. I was laying a card on the table, a card I couldn't take back. His gaze intensified. He searched my face, and I felt completely exposed, as if he could see straight through to the frantic, hopeful, terrified thing that was my heart. "What are you saying?" he whispered, and the question was not an accusation. It was a plea. He was asking for clarity, asking me to give a name to the strange, beautiful, terrifying thing that had been growing between us and the shadows. This was it. This was the precipice. I could retreat, laugh it off as a joke, and we could go back to our safe, agonizing ritual. Or I could jump. I could risk everything, the friendship, the sanctuary, all of it, for the slim possibility that he might feel the same way. I looked at him, at the boy who walked me home, at the man who had sought refuge in my quiet apartment, at the friend I had loved in silence for what felt like a lifetime. And I chose to jump. I didn't say anything. I just reached out and took his hand. His fingers were cold from the rain, but they curled around mine instantly, his grip surprisingly tight. I held his gaze, trying to pour all the years of unspoken feelings into that one look. I saw confusion in his eyes, yes, but I also saw fear, and underneath it all, a flicker of something that looked so much like relief it made my own eyes burn. He took another step, closing the remaining distance between us. He raised his free hand, and his fingers traced the line of my jaw, his touch sending a tremor through me. It was the same hesitant, gentle touch from that night on the couch, but this time, I was awake. This time, it was for me. "Would it be okay?" he breathed, his voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. "Would it be okay if I kissed you?" The question was a gift. He wasn't assuming, he wasn't taking. He was asking. He was giving me the power, the final say. He was showing me a respect and a tenderness that shattered the last of my reservations. A single tear escaped and traced a hot path down my cheek. I couldn't find my voice, so I just nodded, a small, jerky movement. And that was all the confirmation he needed. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away, and then his lips met mine. It wasn't a passionate, movie-style kiss. It was quiet and tentative and breathtakingly soft. It was a question and an answer and a confession all at once. It tasted of rain and salt and years of waiting. In that one, simple kiss, the entire foundation of my world shifted, settling into a new alignment that felt, for the first time, like home. The crossing had been made. The aftermath was not the explosion of joy I might have fantasized about. It was quiet, fragile, and deeply uncertain. After the kiss, we just stood there for a long time, our foreheads resting against each other, his hand still holding mine, the other now resting on the small of my back. The silence in the room was a different kind of silence now. It wasn't heavy with the unsaid, but ringing with the magnitude of what had just been done. We had crossed a line, a beautiful, terrifying line, and neither of us knew what was on the other side. That night, for the first time, we shared my bed. But it wasn't romantic. It was chaste, almost painfully so. We lay on our backs, a careful 6 inches of space between us, 2 soldiers in a trench after a battle, acutely aware of each other, but too stunned to speak. I lay awake all night, my body thrumming with a mixture of euphoria and sheer terror. I had gotten what I always wanted, but now I was terrified of losing it. The next morning, the fragility of our new reality became painfully clear. The storm had passed, and the morning sun streamed through the window, stark and unforgiving. Liam was awake before me, sitting on the edge of the bed, his back to me. The easy camaraderie of our usual mornings was gone, replaced by a thick, awkward tension. When he finally turned to look at me, the confusion and fear I had seen in his eyes the night before were back, magnified. He looked like a man who had woken up in a foreign country with no memory of how he got there. He couldn't meet my eyes. He mumbled something about needing to get to practice early, pulled on his clothes in a rush, and was gone before I could even process what was happening. He didn't say goodbye. He just fled. The silence he left behind was deafening. I sat in my apartment, the scent of him still lingering on my pillows, and felt a cold, creeping dread wash over me. I had misread everything. The kiss had been a mistake, an anomaly born of a stormy night and emotional vulnerability. He was regretting it. He was panicking. And in his panic, he was going to destroy the one thing I couldn't bear to lose: our friendship. The next few days were a special kind of hell. My texts went unanswered. My calls went straight to voicemail. He had erected a wall of silence between us, a wall I had no idea how to breach. The man who had sought refuge in my home was now running from it, and from me. The hope that had bloomed so brightly in my chest withered and died, leaving behind a bitter, familiar ache. I had been a fool to believe it could be real. I was his safe harbor, a temporary port in a storm, and now that the storm in his life was passing, he was setting sail again, leaving me behind on the shore. The loneliness was crushing. The quiet of my apartment, once a source of comfort, now felt like an accusation. Every corner held a memory of him. The couch where he used to sleep, the mug he always used for tea, the spot by the window where we had kissed. I felt his absence as a physical presence, a ghost that followed me from room to room. I fell into a spiral of self-recrimination. I had pushed him. I had said that stupid thing about the couch. I had ruined it. I had taken our perfect, beautiful friendship and smashed it to pieces because I couldn't control my own selfish desires. The pain of his silence was worse than the years of quiet, unrequited love. Before, at least I had him. Now, I had nothing. After a week of this agonizing silence, I knew I couldn't let it end this way. I couldn't let our story conclude with an ellipsis of unanswered texts and a ghost in my apartment. Even if it meant facing the rejection I so dreaded, I needed to hear it from him. I needed closure. I needed to understand. I had to risk one more thing. So, I took the train to his side of the city. I walked to his apartment building, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. I stood outside on the pavement, staring up at his window, feeling like a stalker. I almost turned back a dozen times. But the thought of never speaking to him again was more painful than any rejection he could deliver. I took a deep breath, walked into the lobby, and took the elevator up to his floor. Standing outside his door was the hardest thing I had ever done. My hand trembled as I raised it to knock. I could hear music playing faintly inside. I knocked, my knuckles making a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet hallway. The music stopped. I heard footsteps, and then the sound of the lock turning. The door opened, and there he was. He looked terrible. He was unshaven, with dark circles under his eyes. He was wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and sweats. He looked just as wrecked as I felt. When he saw me, his eyes widened in surprise, and then a shuttered, guarded look came over his face. He didn't speak. He just stood there, blocking the doorway. "Can I come in?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He hesitated for a moment, his internal conflict written all over his face. Finally, he gave a curt nod and stepped aside, letting me pass. His apartment was a mess. Clothes were thrown over chairs. Takeout containers littered the coffee table. It was the apartment of a man who was falling apart. He closed the door behind me, and we stood in the strained silence of his living room, two strangers who knew each other's secrets. "Liam," I started, my voice shaking slightly. "You can't just disappear. You can't do that to me." To us, he wouldn't look at me. He walked over to the window and stared out, his shoulders hunched. "If the kiss was a mistake, just tell me." I continued, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I can handle it. I'm a big boy. But the silence. I can't handle the silence. I deserve more than that. Our friendship deserves more than that." He finally turned around, and his face was a mask of anguish. "A mistake," he said, his voice raw. "Ethan, you don't understand." "Then make me understand." I shot back, my frustration and hurt finally boiling over. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you kissed me, and then you ran away. It looks like you're ashamed, or you regret it, and you're too much of a coward to just say it to my face." "It's not that," he said, running a hand through his messy hair. "It's not about regret. It's—" He trailed off, struggling for the words. "It's just you've always been the one thing in my life that made sense. You're my best friend. You're my safe place." And that night, I realized that I wanted more than that. And it terrified me, my anger deflated, replaced by a stunned silence. This was not the rejection I had been bracing myself for. He started pacing the room, his restless energy finally unleashed. "All my life," he said, his voice gaining momentum, "everyone has had an expectation of me. My parents, my coaches, my ex-girlfriend. I'm Liam the athlete. I'm the guy who wins. I'm supposed to be strong and confident and have it all figured out. I'm supposed to date the pretty girl and have the perfect life. That's the script. And I've been playing that part for so long. I didn't even know it was a part anymore." He stopped and looked at me, his eyes pleading for me to understand. "But with you, there was never a script. I could just be. I could be tired, or sad, or confused, and it was okay. I didn't have to perform for you." He walked over to me, his expression earnest and pained. "When she left me, my whole world fell apart. And the only place I wanted to be was with you. I told myself it was just because you were my friend. But it was more than that. Lying in your bed, in your quiet apartment, I felt a sense of peace I haven't felt in years. And I started to realize that the peace wasn't just the place. It was you." He took a shaky breath. "And that scared the hell out of me. Because it didn't fit the script. It wasn't part of the plan. And when I kissed you, it was like, it was the most real, honest thing I've done in my entire life. And the morning after, I looked at you, and I looked at myself, and I panicked. Who was this person who wanted this? It wasn't Liam the athlete. I didn't know who he was. And I ran. I ran away because I was a coward. I was afraid of what it meant for me and for us. I was afraid of ruining the one good, pure thing in my life." I listened to his confession, and I felt the last of my fear and anger dissolve, replaced by a profound wave of empathy and understanding. He hadn't been running from me. He had been running from himself. He had been running from a truth that threatened to dismantle the entire identity he had built. He wasn't ashamed of me. He was terrified of the person he was becoming. I reached out and took his hand, just as I had on that rainy night. "You could never ruin us," I said softly. "The only thing that could ruin us is not being honest." He looked down at our joined hands, and a single tear rolled down his cheek and splashed onto my thumb. "I'm so sorry, Ethan," he whispered. "I'm so sorry I hurt you. I was just so lost. I know, I said. But you don't have to be. You don't have to have it all figured out. We can figure it out together. He looked up at me, a glimmer of hope returning to his eyes. He squeezed my hand. I'm tired of running, he said. And in that moment, I knew we were going to be okay. The conflict was over. The retreat was finished. He was ready to stop running and finally come home. The resolution wasn't a sudden, cinematic happily ever after. It was quieter, slower, and far more real. It was a process of rebuilding, of learning a new language together. The days that followed our confrontation were filled with talk, more talk than we had shared in all our years of friendship. We laid all our cards on the table. He told me about the pressures he'd felt, the confusion he'd struggled with, the slow, dawning realization that his feelings for me were not just about friendship, but about a deeper, more profound connection he hadn't known how to name. I, in turn, told him about the years of silent longing, the careful dance of hiding my feelings, the fear of losing him that had kept me quiet for so long. It was like lancing a wound. It was painful, but it was necessary, letting all the poison out so that we could finally begin to heal. We took it slow. We started over in a way. The first time he stayed at my apartment after our talk, there was a new intentionality to it. He didn't come as a refugee seeking sanctuary. He came as a man choosing to be with the person he cared about. When we lay down in my bed that night, the chaste, awkward distance was gone. He turned on his side to face me, and he reached for my hand in the dark. He didn't say anything. He just held it, his thumb stroking the back of my palm. It was a simple, grounding gesture, a silent promise that he wasn't going to run away again. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I slept deeply, peacefully, anchored by his presence beside me. A new kind of domesticity bloomed between us. It was woven from small, ordinary moments. It was in the way we started making coffee for each other in the morning, moving around my small kitchen in a comfortable, synchronized dance. It was in the way he started leaving a toothbrush in my bathroom, a spare set of clothes in my closet, small acts of permanence that spoke louder than any grand declaration. He stopped just showing up and started planning. What should we do this weekend? He'd ask, the we a solid, beautiful thing. He started bringing me into his world not just as his friend, but as something more. He introduced me to his teammates again, and this time, there was a subtle shift in his demeanor, a quiet pride in his eyes as he put his arm around my shoulders. They didn't ask questions. They just saw the way he looked at me, and they understood. My camera, which had always loved him from a distance, now got to learn him up close. I took pictures of him sleeping, the morning light tracing the curve of his spine. I took pictures of him laughing, a real, unburdened laugh that reached his eyes. I took pictures of him looking at me, his gaze soft and full of a quiet affection that still made my heart ache. But now it was a good ache, the ache of a dream that had, against all odds, come true. My art had always been about finding the beauty in the quiet, unguarded moments, and now my life was full of them. He was no longer just my muse. He was my partner, the co-author of our story. One Saturday morning, months later, I woke up to find him already awake, propped up on an elbow, just watching me. The guarded, confused look was long gone, replaced by an expression of such pure, uncomplicated tenderness that it took my breath away. "What?" I asked, my voice thick with sleep. He smiled, a slow, easy smile. "Nothing," he said. "I just like watching you sleep. You look peaceful." He leaned down and kissed me, a soft, lazy morning kiss that was full of comfort and certainty. "I love you," he murmured against my lips. The words were not a panicked confession or a desperate plea. They were a simple statement of fact, as easy and natural as breathing. "I love you too," I said, and the words felt like the most honest I had ever spoken. We had found our new normal. It was quiet, and it was steady. It wasn't built on grand gestures, but on a foundation of shared mornings, quiet evenings, and the profound comfort of knowing you have a safe place to land. The bedroom door, which had once been such a potent symbol of our division, of my lonely vigil, was now just a door. Sometimes it was open, sometimes it was closed, but it no longer represented a boundary between us. The real boundary had been dissolved, the one built of fear and misunderstanding. We had learned to exist in the same space, our orbits finally, truly intersecting, creating a new, shared world that was ours alone. There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary, and then there are the moments that follow, the ones where you consciously, deliberately, choose to build a life out of the beautiful wreckage of what came before. The turning of the tide was that first question, that first hesitant request for shelter. But the real story, our story, was written in all the mornings after. It was written in the quiet understanding that passed between us, in the shared language of gentle touches and easy silences. He had been the boy who walked me home, a steadfast presence in the dark. And he had become the man who, after running away in fear, found the courage to turn around and walk back, not just to my home, but to the home we began to build, in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together.